Today's daf is daf Chav Zayin, and we'll begin with Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down from the top. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, who is the grandson of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, we're talking about an Amora, not a Tana. Havale Hahu Bukhra, he had a Bukhar, and the Bukhar was a Balmum, and he wanted to shecht it on Yontif. Shadre Lekame de Rabbi Ami, he sent the following issue to Rabbi Ami: can you, as an expert, check out this Bukhar, examine it, and determine if it's a mum kavua, which would allow me to shech the animal. Savar, but Rabbi Ami thought, Delo lemichse. He's not going to look at and investigate this animal on Yontif. And this reflects the shita of Rabbi Shimon, that ein roim mumchim b'yontif. That mumchim, the experts, should not check out and declare a mum in a bukhar on Yontif. And the reason for that is, as we said in the past, it's considered a tikkun. It's kind of like fixing up something on Yontif, which we try to avoid. Amalei Rabbi Zrika. Rabbi Zrika turns to Rabbi Ami, who refused to take a look and examine the Bukhar on Yontif. He came on to say it was Rabbi Yirmiyah. Isn't it true that Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah argues against Rabbi Shimon, and he's of the opinion that roim mumim b'yontif? Why can't we rely on Rabbi Yehuda? In fact, the Gemara tells us in Masechet Eruvin on Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis that we have a rule of thumb that Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, in a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, halachic Rabbi Yehuda, we always paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So that now Rabbi Zrika is questioning the response of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Hadar Shadre Lekami Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya did not succeed with Rabbi Ami, who is an expert on Bechoros, but he didn't give up hope. He said, let's try another expert. And he sends it to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, but unfortunately he gets the same response from Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, who refuses to check out the Bechor. Savar, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha was of the opinion, Delo Mechse, we're not going to see and check out a Bechor on Yontif. Once again, reflecting the shita of Rabbi Shimon. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah turns to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Tema others say it was Rabbi Zrika. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, halachic Rabbi Yehuda. After all, in a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that roim mumin b'yontif. Amalei Rabbi Abba turns back to Rabbi Zrika, and he says to him, my time lo shav kitinu l'rabbanon l'mevad uvda k'Rabbi Shimon. Why are you objecting to the Rabbanon, the various rabbis that we saw? We saw it in the case of Rabbi Ami, we saw it again in Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. They're all very hesitant about looking and checking out a mum on a Bechor and Yontif. They all accept the sheet of Rabbi Shimon. Why are you fighting against, as we say, City Hall? Amalei, Rabbi Zrika responds to Rabbi Abba, the at, and you think that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon? Ma biyodach. Do you have anything in your hand to rely on? After all, the rule is that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda and machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Amalei, Rabbi Abba says the following: Hachi Omer Rabbi Zera, I have a tradition that dates back to Rabbi Zera, halacha ki Reb Shimon, which means ein roin mumin beyond it. So the Gemara now goes back to Reb Zera and says, how did Rabbi Zera know that in this machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon, we should paskin like Reb Shimon? Now, you may recall yesterday that we had one question unanswered. There was a brisa that recorded the sheet of Reb Shimon in the name of the Chachamim, Stam Chachamim, without mentioning the name of Reb Shimon. That becomes now very relevant. Amar Mandehu, Sam Chacham, we don't know his name, some anonymous Talmud, made the following statement. Eske vi esak lahasam. May it be the will of God that I will go on Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. And when I go, I want to find Reb Zera. Reb Zera had made Aliyah from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. I want to dig up Reb Zera. The Egmara Lishmaita Mipume Demara. Mara means the Balabas. I want to go back to the Balabas, the original, and I want to learn the sugya with Reb Zera. And you're quoting Reb Zera as maintaining that we paskin like Reb Shimon. I'd like to hear it, as we say, from the horse's mouth. I want to go back to the original source. He went on Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Ashkechei Rabbi Zera. He found Reb Zera. Amalei, so the Talmud turns to Rabbi Zera. This is a very great moment that he's been waiting for. And he says to him, Amar Mar, question mark, did you, Mar, Adoni, my master, he talks to him in third person, did you make the statement, Halacha Reb Shimon? Meaning that you have some sort of a tradition that goes back to the time of the Mishnah, the Tanaim, that in this machlokas, we paskin like Reb Shimon. Did you hear it from your Rebbe? Ish mipi ish? Amalei lo. What a disappointment. Could you imagine at this Talmud who had made this whole journey to Eretz Yisrael only to find out that Reb Zera denies that he had such a Masorah. However, Rabbi Zera says, I didn't hear it directly, but I deduced it. Why? You remember that we had that Hanoik statement back in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Shein Mumo Nikar Mivodom Ein Zeh Min HaMuchan. So we know that it's Rabbi Shimon who's the one who says that if you don't have on Erev Yontif a clear determination that this Bechar is a Balmum, then forget it. You can't go near it. Don't even dream of checking it. And the Mishnah quotes it in the name of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is a Das Yochid. He's an individual member of the Tanoim. But Katani La B'Braisa, the Braisa, quoting the same halacha, instead of mentioning Rabbi Shimon by name, B'Loshen Chachamim. And the Braisa says, back on the Chavav of the days we learned this, that whether or not the mum was already in existence on Erev Yontif, or it came into existence on Yontif, Chachamim Omrim, Ein Zeh Min HaMuchan. So why does the Braisa, in quoting Reb Shimon, call him Chachamim? An anonymous name that encompasses all the Chachamim. Apparently, all the Chachamim agreed to Reb Shimon's position, with the exception of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore we have a principle that Yochid v'Rabim halacha kerabim, even if it's a machlokas originally between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon, and according to the rules of Psak, we should be paskening like Rabbi Yehuda, but no, in this case we have another rule of Psak, and that is Yochid v'Rabim halacha kerabim shma mino de'mistabra kavase, and therefore I, Rabbi Zera, derived the logical conclusion that we paskin like Reb Shimon, and we're not going to allow, l'chatchila at least, for the Kohen to check, for the Mumche, to check out the Bechor. I have the LA. The Gemara says, after all this is said and done, what's the final conclusion? Do we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda l'kula or Rabbi Shimon l'chumra? Rabbi Yosef Toshma. Let's learn it from the following statement. Desalya be Ishle Ravrave. Now, Ishle Ravrave is an idiomatic phrase. I'll give you first the meaning of it, and then we'll try to analyze it from an etymological point of view, meaning a literal translation. Ashle Ravrave means the Gedolim. What is Ashle Ravrave? These are ropes. You've seen different sizes of ropes. They come very thin, average size, and then there are the very, very thick ropes. They're this thick, and those are called Ashle Ravrave. And they are so thick that they symbolize the Chachomim Gedolim, the great scholars of all time. And they agree with a unanimous opinion against Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Shimon, that Asur Liros Mumin B'Yontif. We don't check out Mumin on Yontif. And because of these Ashle Ravrave, these very heavy hitters, as we call them, we will have to be committed to Paskin like Rabbi Shimon. And Rabbi Yosef now gives you a little bit of more of an insight into what he said. We're going back now to the original leaders of the Jewish community in the holy city of Jerusalem. And what did they testify? That Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh v'chaver v'malacha Rabbi Meir, that as far as shechting a bechar, before you actually showed it to a chacham, and this, by the way, has nothing to do with Yontif. This would apply any day of the week. You shechted it before, prior to checking it out and getting the official head to the license from a chacham, that it's a balmum kavua. And the Gemara thinks that we're going to paskin like Rabbi Meir based on the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. Again, Rabbi Meir is going to be the machmer. We'll see that in just 1 minute. However, this doesn't make any sense because in the list here of who's who, it mentions Kahala, Kadisha, Yerushalayim. They came way before Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. So it can't be that we're relying on Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. You can't tell me that the Kehillah Kedosh of Yerushalayim testified about Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. They were way before Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. They were much older than him. How could the Kehillah Kedusha of Yerushalayim be saying that halacha in the name of Rav Shimon ben Manasseh? What do you mean you're quoting Rav Shimon ben Manasseh? He wasn't even alive at the time that you lived. Ella, but rather, what is really the meaning here? That Rav Shimon and his colleagues, they said the halacha is ein roim mumin b'yontif. And therefore, the Kehillah Kedosha of the Zkenim that came from an early generation, they also came up with the same conclusion, and they taught the younger generation that halacha. And it was all reflective of Shitas Rabbi Meir Amarua. And Rabbi Meir was a contemporary of the younger generation, but already the Kehillah Kedosh of Yerushalayim already accepted that opinion of the younger generation, meaning Rabbi Meir, and that's what Rav Shimon ben Manasseh was testifying. That already in earlier generations, back in the Kehillah Kedosh of Yerushalayim, they accepted the view of Rabbi Meir. This now let's see what Rabbi Meir holds. This is a Mishnah of Masechet Bechoros on Daf Chav Ches. Hashochet, we're talking any day of the week. We're not talking about Yod. Hashochet es habachar. He's got a bachar balmum and he shechts it, and he hadn't shown it to the chacham. Could you imagine? A chutzpah. He shechts a bachar, which would be kodshim bachutz if it's a tamim, and he's assuming without getting the official psak and the license from the chacham that this bachar is a balmum. Herho es mumo, v'achakach, meaning after the shchita. after the shechita is ready post facto, and he calls up the chacham on the telephone and he says, please come down here and check out the shchuta. I've already shechted it. And the chacham confirms that this is a balmum, but it was post facto. It's Rabbi Yehuda Mati. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, the shechita was a perfectly good, valid shechita. There were no psulim, no disqualifications. And although lechatchila he shouldn't have shechted it, he should have certainly first determined that it was a balmum by getting the official word from the chacham. But nevertheless, he went ahead and did so. And b'di'eved, we're not going to say that the bechar is also b'achila. Rabbi Meir Omer, hoel v'nishchat. He went ahead with the audacity of slaughtering this bechar before he got the okay. Shalal pi mumcha. Awesome. You're not allowed to eat from this animal. It's almost as if you need two matirim to allow the meat of this animal to be eaten. Number one, you need a horas mumche. Number two, you need a shechita. So we now integrate the re'iyah of the mumche together with the shechita, and as one entity, you could be mati, you could permit eating the meat. But if you're missing one of those two elements, shechita is upgrade, that's for sure. Without shechita, it's an avela. But even though you had shechita, if he was missing the prior determination of the mumche, then you can't eat from the meat. That's Rabbi Meir. Alma kasavar Rabbi Meir re'iyas bechar lav kere'iyas treifa. In the case of an animal that was shechted and we want to determine whether it was a healthy animal, we'll check out the innards, the vital organs, and we'll determine whether it's a treifa or not. I don't need that bedika, that examination before the shechita. It could come afterwards. Says Rabbi Meir, not so in the case of re'iyas bechar al yedei mumcha. Re'iyas bechar michayim. It has to precede the shechita while the animal's still alive. Re'iyas treifel yachar shechita. You can check out the animal for its inner vital organs after the shechita. So we see that the Chachamim considered re'iyas habechar to be a matir, to be part of the matir, the halachic process of permitting the eating of the basar of the animal. Umina. From this statement of Rabbi Meir, Reb Shimon ben Asya and his colleagues derived the conclusion that re'iyas treifa is permissible afilu b'yontif, like any orah sisa v'heter. For example, on yontif, I don't know whether or not I'm allowed to cook something, to prepare something. I go to a chacham and he paskins for me. Or even on yontif, let's say, one of my tzitzis got ripped off, one of the chutim are ripped, and I want to know whether I'm allowed to make a brach on these tzitzis. So I go to a chacham and he's allowed to paskin for me on yontif. We're not allergic to horas, isa v'heter on yontif. But re'iyas bechar is mei erev yontif. When you talk about re'iyas bechar, the Rabbanan considered it, this horas chacham, like a matir. And therefore, it's a tikkun kli. You're fixing up the meat by getting the okay, the license, and the ruling from the mumcha, and that it's a balmum. It's almost like the mumcha is issuing a verdict in a case of litigation, which is called a din, and that's not allowed on yontif. And therefore, the only time that we could allow re'iyas mum is on erev yontif. So based on this, Rav Yosef comes to the conclusion that this din of yontif is totally bi'ashlei ravui. It really depends upon the greats. And since the Kehila Kedosha of Yerushalayim, which came way before Reb Shimon ben Asya, they apparently held Ein Rohin Mumim B'Yontif, which means that we accept the Shita of Rabbi Shimon against Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why Rabbi Meir says Hashoket es habakar, the Achkach Heres Mumo Asur. This is all one shita, namely that we upgrade the status of Re'iyas HaMumche to that of a matir. It's part of the very process of being matir. It's like issuing a verdict and a din in a litigation. Hence, Rabbi Meir is not going to tolerate a post-shchita Re'iyas HaMumche because the shchita is standing on the shoulders and is a continuation of the determination of the mumche, and hence Reb Shimon is right that on Yontif we will not permit Re'iyas HaMumche es mum habachar, because that would be tantamount to din, to a matir. It's tikkun kli, it's like din, and it's prohibited. Therefore, Rav Yosef comes to the conclusion that la halacha ein roim mumchin b'yontif. That is the conclusion of Yosef, that we accept the shita of Rabbi Shimon. Amalei Abai. This is so classic. Whenever Rav Yosef gives a presentation, you could wait for a second or two. Who's in the wings there to argue against Rav Yosef? It's always going to be Abai. Abai, by the way, was a little bit of a Talmud of Rav Yosef, but he was considered what we call a Talmud Chaver. So he would argue and raise objections against Rav Yosef. Atu Hasam, are you quoting a Mishnah in Bechoros, Rav Yosef? In the case of somebody who shechted a Bechor before he showed the Mumche, the Bechor, to check it out and determine whether that's a Mum, is Beroim Mumin Pligi? Are you telling me that the entire issue addressed by the Mishnah in Bechoros is whether or not you can check out the Mum after Shechita? Means that Rabbi Meir holds that since Re'iyas Chacham is elevated, upgraded to the status of a matir, it has to come before the Shechita, and therefore ein roim mumin b'char achar Shechita. No. You're making a mistake. The knasa plea. The machlokas here is about a knas, is about what should we do if somebody violates the law? Shall we penalize him? So someone violated the takonis chachamim that we shecht a bechar after bias hachacham, after the mumcha. Checked it out. He violated that. He went ahead and he shechted it before the mumcha determined. And therefore, as far as the heter through Re'iyas Chacham, it could be that Re'iyas Chacham, like Re'iyas Treifa that we discussed earlier, they're all equal. And we're not considering Re'iyas Chacham as a matir, and therefore it must come before the Shechita. That's not what Rabbi Meir is saying. But rather, it's not considered a masakin, it's not a din, it's more similar to Re'iyas Treifa. But yet, since there was the takonis chachamim, that the Re'iyas HaMumche has to take place before the Shechita, and he violated that din, Reb Meir introduced a punitive enactment that he should be suffering a knas. We're not going to let him rely on the Shechita. But even Rabbi Meir agrees that if we put the takonis chachamim on the side for a moment, and we go back to the Ikar Adin, the main halacha is that Shechita is a matir. I don't need the determination of the mumche to be matir. The determination of the mumche is only a clarification. It's nothing more. Just like in Treifus, we have a clarification, but the Chachamim were worried that maybe he would never get the okay, and maybe this Bechar, in fact, is a tam and not a balmum. Therefore, we have to have a determination before we go into the Shechita. He violated that takonis chachamim. We're going to penalize him according to Rabbi Meir. However, you cannot prove anything from Rabbi Meir about Re'iyas Mumin on Yontif. The machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda regarding Re'iyas Mumin on Yontif revolves around the status of whether or not Re'iyas Mumin is a matir. It's not a matir. Even Rabbi Meir could agree with Rabbi Shimon. It's not a matir. I'm sorry. Even Rabbi Meir could agree with Rabbi Yehuda that Re'iyas HaMumcha is not a matir. And therefore it's allowed on Yontif. The only thing is, when he implements the shechita before the Re'iyas HaMumcha, then Rabbi Meir gets very strict with him and hits him with a penalty. Tiomar Rabbi Bar Bachana Rabbi Yochanan Bidukim Sheba'ayin. Now the Gemara wants to prove that if a person shechts a bechar before he got the okay from the chacham, then he deserves a penalty. How do we prove this? From a statement of Rabbah in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And now we have a case of bidukim sheba'ayin. The animal has something around its eye, like a film around its eye. And it's considered a mum, as we see from a pasuk in Vayikra Chaf Aleph, which goes through the mumim of Kohanim, and one of them is O Gabeno Dak, and Dak means he has a krum sheba'ayin, and that's a mum that's common to both the Kohen and to the Bechar, or any animal that you want to bring on the Mizbeach. B'li'amalo pligi, the asur, which means there's no machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda in the case of krum sheba'ayin, bedukim sheba'ayin, because even if now we look at the ayin and we see the krum, again, this is after shechita, and it looks like a mum kavua, mishum de mishtanin. There's certain physiological phenomena that change, alter after death, that posthumously change. So it could be very possible that during its lifetime, the Bechar was not a Balmum. It looks like a Balmum now because of something that developed over the eye after the Shechita. Where is the machlokus then between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda? Ki pligi, when they showed the chacham after the shechita, mumin shebeguf. Mumin shebeguf means, let's say the leg of the animal was amputated, or for example, the ear was amputated, or there's a split in its lips. All these are mumin kvuim, which did not change as a result of death. So we know now that this Bechar at the time of the Shechita was a Balmum. And now we go through the two Shitas. Rabbi Meir's Savar, Meir is going to institute a penalty because he had the chutzpah of delaying the Riyas HaMumcha until after the Shechita. Is Gazrin and Mumin Shebeguf to Mumin Shebayin. We're going to treat all the Mumim as like the Mumin Shebayin, as if it became a mum kavua after the death of the animal, after the shechita, post shechita, but in its lifetime it was a tam. Rabbi Yehuda Savalo Gazrina, we're not going to institute a knas, a penalty that's based on the gzeira that if we allow mumin shebeguf after misa, after shechita, they'll come to be matir even bedukim sheba. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, masnisa nami daika. Even at Mishnah is meduyuk like Abaye, that Rabbi Meir's prohibition is based on a knas. The Katani we saw in the Mishnah in Bechoros, Rabbi Meir Omer, oh, v'nichchat shelo al pi mumcha asur. Now, if Rabbi Meir, the way his shita was explained by Rav Yosef before we get to Abaye, that there's no re'iyas mumei bechar after shchita, then he should have been very terse in his language. He should have said, Rabbi Meir Oser. Meaning that the din itself is it's not a knas. It's mi guf din that we can't rely on the re'iyas hamum al yidei mumche after the shechita, but rather since it says v'hoil v'nishchat shalo al pi mumche, it's obvious that he means that he violated the takonis chachamim by going ahead and checking the animal before riyas hamum cheshma mina knasa hu dekakonis. So the final maskana of this gemara, if we want to summarize it, is that in the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, the whole machlokas revolves around knas, and therefore we cannot prove anything from Rabbi Meir regarding Rabbi Shimon's shita relevant to Masechet Beitza that ain't roim mumin b'yontiv, because it could be that Rabbi Meir himself would agree that roim mumin b'yontiv, it's not considered a matir, and it's not a din. There's no takana and tikkun over here. The only thing is that if we want to make sure that people don't get used to shechting an animal, which is a bechar, before checking it out with a chacham, we're going to institute a knas, and we're going to tell them, listen, my friend, I'm warning you, if you go ahead and shech this animal prior to the re'iyas hamumche, we're not going to allow you to eat from the animal. Now the Gemara tells us a story about Ami, a chacham by the name of Ami, Vardina. Okay, he came from Vardina. I'm guessing it's probably an area somewhere in Bava. Chazi Bucher de Beitza Hava. He was the expert on Bechoros in the house of the Nasi. They always brought him the Bechoros to check out the moon. Ubiyom Tavel Avi Chazi. He refused to examine the Bechoros on Yont, to allow them to check the Bechor on Yont. Also, Rav Ami. So the students came to complain to Rav Ami, why is he being so strict when we have the Shita Rabbi Yehuda? Amalahu Rabbi Ami answered him, Shapir ka'avid lo chazi. You know what? I agree with him full part of it. We don't check out and examine movement on Yont. So the Gemara says, Eini, I'm going to prove to you that that's not so from a statement of Rabbi Ami himself. For Rabbi Ami Gufe Chazi. We know that Rabbi Ami himself, who was a mumche in Mumin, he would check out a mum on Yantif and determine that this Bechar is a Baal Mum Kavua. More answers, Rabbi Ami ki Chazi me esmol havi Chazi. It's not exactly the way you transmit it. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And the process of examining a Bechar has two segments to it. Number one is to look at the Bechar, examine its body, and determine whether it's a Mum Kavua. But that's not enough. The final determination is contingent upon B. What's B? You have to make sure that there was no hanky-panky going on, meaning there was no illegitimate, deliberate incision made into the animal to make it into a balmum. Keep in mind the Kohen here has vested interest, because if it's a balmum, they shechted and he gets the entire animal. It's worth hundreds. So what happened? Rabbi Ami ki chazi me'esmol havi chazi. Already on Erev Yontif, before Yontif, he checked out the mum. He decided in his mind that it's a mum kavua. But the law requires that the chacham check out the mum and find out that it happened as a natural consequence, or perhaps was it a deliberate act on the part of a Kohen who owns this Bechar and wants to eat the Bechar. And he has vested interest in determining that the Bechar is a Baal Mum Kavua. And maybe he went ahead and in the darkness of night, he snuck in there and he cut a little bit of an incision on the lip or on the ear or whatever it was. So what happened? They brought this Bechar to Rabbi Amyan Erev Yontif, and he checked it out. In his mind, he had decided that it's a Baal Mum Kavua.